Thank you, everybody. Can I have a show of hands? Who on here has heard me speak before? Some. A handful. Literally just a handful. Oh, wow. We're going to have a bit of fun then. Okay. Now, before we even begin, I'd like to know, all of you, what your status in terms of podcasting is. Do you know nothing? Are you already an expert or something in between? So I'm going to ask Daniel now, if you wouldn't mind, just putting a little poll up. I hope you can all see this. So with regard to podcasts, some of you may not even know what podcasting is and you just decided to come along and find out, which is fine. So just put you don't know or total novice. But if you could be kind enough to have a look at this poll and reply back, this just then gives me a feel at what sort of level everybody is at. So Daniel, once people have replied, if you would be kind enough to share the poll results with everybody so everyone can see it, so we can see in the room just where we're at.
I think we've
in
got
terms of this
95% voted now. Shall we?
Yeah, please show the poll because I'm curious as well. Oh wow. Okay, there's a maybe one or two people are experts, which is good. Some have things done with early days, but that's nice. Some have a strong idea but don't know how to start. You're in the right place. That's good. Considered it but done nothing. That's many people. I was the same boat, so I can relate to that. And there's quite a few of you total novices, which is fine because we will cover the very basics. Thank you, Daniel. If you could shut that off. Right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you all see that? You put me on brilliant. Now, we are going to go through the basics here on podcasting, literally from A to Z. Now, it depends on the time. We'll show you what we may be time restrained. I mean, we've only got 1 a.m. So I think we can get it all in by then. Nobody caught that joke. Oh, well. No, we're not going to be here. Hopefully an hour will be done and we can go through it quite quickly. So now you may be wondering if this flicks on, who am I? Why am I even running this workshop? Well, I'll show you. I am part of a duo and we do what's called the TNT talk show. I share the stage with a friend of mine called Tayo Boya, and we're on local radio in our area. And if you notice on this sheet, if you can see it, we are on quite late at night, 11 o'clock at night, because we have a talk show where we discuss adult themed material, and hence why we're past the watershed. And it's not adult in that sense. I'm talking some of the topics are quite controversial, so we had to be put past the watershed. Now, we are also on Spotify, we are also on Apple iTunes, we're on Google, we are on Amazon Alexa. You can even ask Alexa, please play the TNT talk show, and it will play it. So we are everywhere. We've been doing this for a while now. We've got an established audience. And if you want to go to Google itself, you can find all our back episodes on Google by just literally going to Google and doing a search for the TNT is explosive talk show. So that's what it's for. So you can have a look. In fact, I'm going to put the link in the chat. So if you have a look at that, if you can see it, not now obviously because we're in the middle of some training, but if you fancy it and you want to have a look, there's all our back episodes, and those are podcasts. So you can then listen to them. And that's the beauty of podcasts. Now, I am going to ask as well, we've done it, I suppose, with the survey, I suppose, individually, if you wanted to shout out what your expectations are from this workshop. Where do you want to be at the end of the hour? Do you want to have enough knowledge where you can go, right, I'm ready to go? If you do, then that's great. That's what we'll achieve. So we'll go through this step by step and we'll see what we can get done. Now, what we'll cover today, very simply, what is a podcast? Because some of you have said you're total novices, so we'll cover that. What sort of skills do you need in order to deliver a podcast? You might be thinking, well, what is there? We can touch on that very quickly. Then we're going to have a little workshop, very quick, 2 or 3 minutes, where you will be doing some work, very simply, where if you've got an idea already, fantastic, write it down. But if you haven't, this is your opportunity to have a think if this is something for you. Then, a real important question, why choose podcasting over other formats? Why? Why not simply write a blog or create a YouTube video? We can discuss that too. And also, what's good and bad for a podcast? Because there are things that are not suitable, and we'll touch on there. Then we'll outline a structure of a podcast. Then we're going to have another mini workshop where exercise that you will all partake in once again, where you will put down 10 ideas for your podcast. Now you might think straight away, 10? I haven't even got one. Well, to be honest, if you seriously are considering having a podcast, you need to have 10 ideas in the pipeline to record. It's no good starting to launch something with just one. So you need to plan ahead. So I'm warning you that is something you need to think about. I'll give you time to do it, so don't panic. So you will get some time to have a think about what you could put down if you choose to have a workshop. Then we're going to touch on the equipment. What do you use for equipment? Do I have to spend hundreds? We'll touch on that. Also, what's the final pieces to putting it together? And then if we've got time, a quick Q&A. Now, it does seem like an action-packed event, and it is. So I will zip through this fairly quickly. So bear with me, please. Okay? Right. We'll start at the very beginning. What is a podcast? So I don't know if any of you want to shout. Oh, what's that say? I see the presentation. Go to top right hand corner, select speaker view. Oh, Sue was struggling. Yeah, you want to put it in speaker view. If you can't, if I'm squashed up in the corner for you, just go to the top of your right hand corner of your screen where it says view. Click on that and select speaker view, and I should then appear big on your screen and you can actually see the slides. Sorry about that. I should have made that clear at the beginning. Right, podcast, all it is very simply is a audio file. That's all it is. Now the popular format is MP3. Now don't get hung up about that if you don't know what that is, but that is the standard that every audio file, well, 99% of audio files out there are MP3s. There are others, there's WAV files, OGG files, etc. But most of the platforms now ask for MP3 files. Now, fortunately, they're easy to put together if you wanted to create one. But all it is just a simple audio file that people listen to. Now, they don't download them. What that means is download is where in essence, you're copying it down to your device. It doesn't work that way. What happens is you tend to stream it. What that means is the file remains in the cloud somewhere, and we'll touch on that in a minute. And the person listening to your audio file can listen to it on their headphones. They can download it temporarily, but it isn't theirs to keep. It's almost like a rental. You can rent and listen to the podcast, but it doesn't actually belong to you. So that's what a podcast in essence is. Because if you were creating a podcast and you've created really good stuff, that's your intellectual property. It's yours. So people shouldn't be able to just take it and steal it. So podcasting sort of forbids or stops people from stealing it because they can only listen to it from a provider. They can't take it and copy it and distribute it elsewhere. So if you wanted to, you could charge for it if that's your goal. And that way you know that someone can't then steal it and sell it on because it's your intellectual property. Anyway, let's move on. So, very simply, what skills do you need to deliver a podcast? Anyone want to shout out if they want to? Take a microphone off or put a note in there. What skills do you need? Well, in reality, you don't need any special skill other than the ability to talk. Now, most of us on here now are Toastmasters, so we've got a heck of an advantage because most of us are taught how to speak. So we are really in an advantage across the board because we've got that ability. Whereas a lot of people out there who start podcasts are awful. And you may have even heard radio presenters like this who and ah, and because we're Toastmasters, we catch on it. And it drives us nuts. That guy's umming and ahhing all the time. But because we're Toastmasters, we have got an advantage over and above a lot of people out there because we already know, or are learning to, some of us, how to speak. So that's an advantage of Toastmasters. So we got that head start. So what we're going to do very, very quickly now, you can see the clock. I want you all to get a piece of paper and I want you all to have a couple of minutes now just to jot down some ideas for a podcast. What would you feel you want to share? What knowledge do you have that will benefit a listener? So have a think now. We'll have a couple of minutes where you can write a few bits down. Now you may have more than one thing you want to discuss. Fantastic. Write those down. Literally get a piece of paper now and put those on a piece of paper. Yeah, has everybody had time to come up with something? Wonderful. Right. Back to the presentation. Okay. Right. Now, you might be thinking, why? I mean, I already touched on it. Why would you choose podcasting over other medium? Okay. Because podcasting is an audio file, obviously. But you could, if you wanted to, do YouTube videos, couldn't you? Everyone has the ability to record on mobile devices today. So you could do a video, couldn't you? There's no harm in doing that. Or the other option is having a blog, which a blog, for those that don't know, is just written word, but you're regular and consistent. Well, I can tell you the difference. Before we touch on why would you use a podcast, you do need to think. I'll flick it forward. You need to think about what sort of content you're creating or wanting to create beforehand. So, for instance, who's your audience of your podcast? What who do you want to talk to? Also, you then have to determine by what you've written down on your piece of paper today, what's the best platform for your audience? Because you may be covering something which may not be suitable for a podcast in actual fact. And we will touch on that. And what do you expect your audience to get from your podcast? You see? Because let me give you some figures here. I've got some figures which are quite startling, actually. Podcasts themselves, YouTube videos, let's talk about that first. YouTube videos, there are 40 million active channels on YouTube for videos. 40 million. And every month they're viewed 2 billion times. 2 billion, which is enormous number. Now, in contrast, blogging, which is literally the written word that you can go and read somebody's thoughts, there are 500 million active bloggers out there. 500 million. Okay, so enormous number of bloggers compared to YouTube videos. But podcasts, now you'd be surprised to hear this, there are only 1 million active podcast channels. That's literally just from here, 1 million. So the competition for casting there's so much less competition. So if you produce a podcast which has value and your audience are interested in it, you've got less competition to compete against. So there's more opportunity for your podcast to rise up the ranks and be broadcast on places like iTunes, Google, Spotify, Alexa, etc. So we will now discuss what is good and bad for a podcast. Okay. Now, you ever wondered that? You think, what can work on a podcast and what can't work? Because there are things that don't work on a podcast. I'll give you an example here. So, what's bad?
Anything.
You probably think to yourself, I wonder what can... Go on. Please say that again, whoever that was. That was right.
It's anything that needs something visual.
Yes, well done. Absolutely.
Sorry, I thought I was talking
a podcast
to myself.
where... No, that was good. Well done. Well done. You're absolutely correct. Because anything that's complicated or needs a lot of descriptions and a lot of images, you might not really go for podcasting. Now, I noticed somebody put a comment in here about vlogging. Steve put in a good question. Podcasting versus vlogging. Well, the reason they're different is because vlogging is a video log. Now, what you got to understand about, shouldn't be erring, but what you got to understand the differences between podcasting and video logging is the way they are consumed. It's like on YouTube, for instance, video logging fits in the same mold. The attention span of one of your viewers or listeners is only finite because they've got to be active then and there. Now, with podcast, however, they can be a lot longer format because people digest podcasts in more flexible ways. For example, you can take your podcast on your phone and go for a walk. So you could be doing something else. You could be ironing and listening to your podcast. You could be in your car listening to it on your stereo in your car, listening to podcasts. So podcasts normally are a lot longer, and the benefit is you can build relationships with your audience. And so once they buy into you, they buy in how you say it and what you say, they're more likely to be an ardent fan and look forward to hearing your podcasts again. You can even take a podcast on a plane and listen to it. Video logging and YouTube, for instance, are a bit more restricted because the average attention span, they were saying about video views, especially on YouTube, is 10 minutes. And that's good. If you can grab someone for 10 minutes on YouTube, you're doing good. Most people lose people after the first few minutes because someone got someone else that's vying for your attention. So videoing is fine if you've got, for instance, this subject here, if you've got images or you've got something you want to show people, then podcasting seriously is maybe not a platform for you. But if you've got something that you think you can tell people and people will digest, then podcasting is probably the way to go. So Steve, thank you for your question. That was a great question, by the way. Right, so what's good? Yeah, if you want to show somebody, I put that in the slide, didn't I? But what's good for podcasting? Well, literally everything else. The only thing it isn't good for is if you've got complicated things to show. So for instance, if I'm talking to someone on our podcast or radio show who's a guest on our show or whatever, if they say, oh, you should have seen this, that then, unfortunately, excludes all the listeners. So we have to then play a part and say, well, look, listeners, for the benefit of our listeners, if you want to see what our guest is talking about, then go to this website. So you're including your guests so they can see what it is that you're talking about. So that's the clever word, the see bit. If you need a podcast where someone has to see stuff, you need to accompany that podcast with something like a website or a Facebook page where you can put video or reference material that your listeners can then go to and see what it is you're talking about. But you should limit that. You shouldn't make that something which you often have to do because you don't want your listeners from having to go elsewhere. They want to get all the content directly from you in your podcast because that's the medium that they've chosen to listen to you with. Right, let's move on because I'm conscious of the time. What's the structure of a podcast? You scratch your head, you go, what is a structure? Why does a podcast need a structure? Well, it does, but it's a bit like giving a speech. And again, we're at an advantage, aren't we? Because we're Toastmasters. To give a speech, what do? You want to shout it out? You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you start strong, explain in the middle your subject, and, woo the audience, chat with them, discuss issues, but then you finish strong. You finish with a call to action. And I'm going to quickly give a bit more detail about what that should be, the structure of a podcast. So first off, you really do need a jingle. And that jingle to your podcast has to be less than 20 seconds. That is your grabber where your audience associate that podcast to you. So it's your audible brand signature. So when somebody listens to that jingle, they know, oh yeah, it's I'm going to pick on Halim. It's Halim's podcast. Yay! Hi Halim. It's his podcast. So you know it's him and it's your brand. So you do need some sort of a jingle, but it can't go on forever. Again, it's got to be short, succinct, and you grab people. 20 seconds is a sweet spot. Now you can go less than that actually. There's no harm in that. But 20 seconds is your maximum. Any longer than that and people get bored and they'll go elsewhere. Remember, you want to grab people. So that's very important. So 20 seconds. And also the jingle needs to be congruent with what your subject matter is. So if you're talking about uplifting stories or motivation, then make sure your jingle is upbeat. But if you're talking about serious subjects like mental health or cancer or heart disease, I'll talk about that in a minute, heart disease, then your intro music has to reflect that as well. So it's congruent with your subject matter. Now, someone's put a really good question in. What about copyright on jingle using music? You can't use music if it's copyrighted. At the end of this, I'm going to put out a little survey, which I hope all of you will fill in. I do have sources where you can get free audio and you can download it. But if you give me a review, I'll give you the link to that. I am looking for a review for this podcast. So if you could oblige, I would very much appreciate it. And I can give you links to various sites that we've used that are totally free. Some of them you do have to mention the author. So you can say that at the beginning. You say, hi, this tune belongs to John Jones, for argument's sake. And then it carries on. That's all you need to do. But you can use it commercially as well. So I will give you some links to websites where you can get free audio. Right, let's move on. The next step. Then you mention what your subject is. What you're talking about in the podcast. That's very important. So you've had your jingle. Then literally you have to jump in and say what we're talking about on the program today. You have to jump that in then. Don't wait. Don't tell them who you are yet. That comes next. You always start with the subject because they want to know what this is about. Then you move on who you are. Now in your first few episodes, you need to convince your audience why you're talking about it. Why have you got authority on this subject? Now, if it's a specialist subject, then you need to give your credentials. Hi, I'm a scientist for BP, and today we're going to talk about the logistics of, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah? So you are framing who you are in order to talk about the subject. Now, that's not necessary, however, if you're talking about a topic in I don't know, current affairs or a news item or something which is an opinion. You don't need to do any of that. That's not relevant. Just give them your name, who you are, and why you maybe set it up in the first place, because you've got a passion about it. That's all that's needed at that point. Next, start your topic. Talk about it. And if you're on your own, absolutely. Talk to the audience like you would at a Toastmasters meeting. One thing you do have to bear in mind, though, when you are talking, if you're on your own, we're taught as Toastmasters to have pauses when we're speaking. When you're on audio only, that pause should be there, but not as long. Don't leave a long, it's called dead time in the audio and podcast industry. Don't leave it too long. By all means leave it, but not too long. Because if it's too long a pause, people get put, what's going on? Why has it gone quiet? So you want to avoid that. You want to ensure that you do have a pause at the right moment, but not for too long. So that's a key ingredient to take away. What you may notice as well is if you're ever listening to other people's podcasts, especially those that are established, they don't have long pauses, but instead they interject with things like, oh, really? Of course. So they're giving verbal feedback even to themselves. Like, I've really thought about this. Yeah, I did. So the person who's listening is picking up all these little extra sounds that maybe are frowned upon in a live situation, but on audio, they're almost not expected, but accepted. So that's something to bear in mind. Then once you've gone through your subject, if you've got any guests, by all means, bring them in. Obviously, because of COVID, that's obviously a bit difficult, but as things improve, then we can do that again. You can physically meet people and maybe have a guest appear on your podcast, if so you choose. Another one you need to have at the end is a call to action. What do you want your listeners to do? And this you do at the end. So what do you want them to do? Do you want them to tune in again? If you do, great. Tell them when your next show's on and stick to it. So if you make a promise, stick to it. So if you're going to make a podcast weekly, stick to it. If you're going to do it daily, I wouldn't suggest that, but you could if you've got loads and loads of content, but stick to it. Get in a routine, make sure you produce it at the right time and release it at the right time. And I'll talk about that. Because once you do, your listeners will become loyal to you. It's like on the TV, when you have a series, you know when that series is on is at a certain time once a week. So you can tune into it. You don't have one on a Saturday afternoon, the next one on Tuesday, the other one the following Monday. You know, that will throw people. But when you get consistent, then that works best. So give them a call to action. If you're selling stuff, which you can on a podcast if you've built an audience, then your call to action should be go to my webpage, buy my book, buy my gadget, or whatever it is. These are all call to actions for your listeners. And then to tail off the podcast, the final piece, again, this is optional, mind you, is a jingle. Now, the ideal thing is to use the same jingle you started the podcast with. So you top and tail the podcast, start to finish. This structure is a winning structure. If you do this and you use it as a framework for your podcast, this will bring you ahead of the competition, because there's a lot of people out there who struggle with podcasts because they don't use the structure correctly. So this is a key takeaway. Right, enough of me waffling on there. I've been wobbling on quite a bit. We're going to have a little exercise once again. So again, please get your pens and papers out, please. This time we're going to have a little bit longer. Now, I want you to write down, we've come up with an idea that we did earlier. Now, I want you to flesh that out a bit. You need to come up with 10 ideas that are linked to that idea that you started with, that what you can talk about. So have a think now, write down 1 to 10 on your piece of paper and have a think of what topics you could cover in your podcast series. Now, don't be bummed out if you're really stuck after 5. As long as you've got more than 1 down, several down. Let's put that down, because you can get inspiration later. But right, is everybody done here? Cameron only got 8, that's fine. Gerard 7. How'd you get your podcast notice, Liam? Secret question. I will come back with you in a minute on that one. Okay, let's move on. I think we've given you enough time to have a play. Binnell said your sound goes in and out. Oh dear, does it? Is everyone else having problems like that? Can you hear me go in and out, are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
really.
Right, let's move on. Let's move on. Right, okay. Next one I said we'd cover equipment to use. Thinking, wow, visuals are blurry. Oh dear. Can you still see my slides? IT, this is great, isn't it? Can you all see my slides still? Cool. Right, equipment to use. What equipment? I've often get asked this. What equipment shall I use? Shall I spend thousands of pounds? No, don't be daft. Don't splash out. Did you know a phone, a modern phone, has got more capability than what we ever used to have? And honestly, the audio quality of the latest phones is phenomenal. There are people who have got really fantastic podcasts and it's all recorded on their phone. So you do not need any fancy equipment. You really do not. A phone is adequate to get you started, and most of us have got a phone. If you haven't got a phone, do you know what? You can even use Zoom. Now, the Zoom quality isn't quite as good, but I'll show you a quick technique here on how to fix that, because it's part of the editing process. But with a phone, if you've got a phone with you and you're away from distractions, a phone is a phenomenal way of doing a podcast because the quality really is superb. And so you can upload it straight from a phone if you're happy with it. I will show you that, yes. Idara, as you can tell, she's an expert. Okay. Now, there is a problem with phones as well, but with all devices. But I'll show you my setup, right, very quickly. This is me, right? Now, obviously, I've spent a little bit more on my equipment where I've got a powered mic, which is not a passive mic. It has, it's got power for it, and it's called Phantom Power. But that was an expensive microphone. And that little arm thing, which is hanging over the top, is called a pop filter. The reason for that is what tends to happen with audio, you've got to be mindful of this, you get these little sounds. And they're very, very distracting. You might not hear it, but the person at the other end picks it up. So this pop filter doesn't eradicate it altogether, but it does reduce it, so that you can speak more clearly without having to be mindful of your P sounds, because they pop, and that thing is supposed to stop that happening. So that's what it is. But the reason I've obviously had to invest a little bit more is because I've got a radio show that I've had to record from home, and also in order to make sure that I get rid of these pop sounds, etc., etc. Right, moving on. Final steps to putting out a podcast. We've had some questions about this already, but there's 3 key areas that you need to get right once you've recorded your audio. Now, it doesn't matter about the length on a podcast, pretty much. You can ramble on for quite a bit. I personally would stick within an hour. Hour seems to be a psychological amount that people have for podcasts. But there are people out there doing them 2-3 hours, because you can obviously stop and start them again like anything really. But for video, no. Unless you're an established YouTuber, then you can go for longer lengths. But if you're thinking of going via YouTube or vlogging, then keep them short and sweet. But the 3 steps that I want to touch on are, number 1, you've got to edit your podcast. You need to get that right to make sure the quality is good. You also need to publish to a host provider. You see, you can't publish to iTunes or Spotify or Google or Alexa. They're not interested. You've got to publish your content to a host provider. And what they do, they have an RSS feed, which is what it's called, where they actually push it out to all these other publishers who are iTunes, Spotify, Alexa, whatever. And they're the big boys in there. But you cannot get on there until you found a publisher. And then the third key one is promote. Now, one thing I'm going to disappoint a lot of you, the host providers don't promote your stuff whatsoever. All they do, for a fee, because they cost money, they're not cheap, some of the good ones anyway, they will publish your content as soon as you create it. So if you create a podcast, you upload it to your host provider. Your host provider will then, for a fee, pass it to iTunes, Spotify, or the others. You choose who they want depending on the price. Now, there are some host providers that will start for free, and they're okay to get started with. Disadvantages with some of the free ones is they only hold your content for, I think it's up to 90 days. After that, they will wipe it. So if you're not too fussed, that's fine, you can use them. Also, they don't tend to publicize it out to the big boys for the free services. Now, I could stand corrected. If you find someone out there that does, then let me know, but most of them don't. You would have to pay them a monthly fee in order for them to provide your podcast to some of the big boys. And when you're up and coming, if you've got a good quality, I'll touch on that question. Janine's asked me a good question. But when you've got a good quality podcast, you are building a following. Now, I must stress, it's a good question that Janine has quickly said, how do you make money from a podcast? There isn't an easy way of doing it. There isn't. Podcasts are really to build your profile, to get your name out there. And then from within your podcast, you've created an authority that people trust and get to know you through what you've told them. And they're more likely to then buy anything else you're willing to offer them via referral marketing, whether you've got a product that you want to sell yourself, things like that. There's not an easy way of earning money directly from podcasts in that respect. It's not like YouTube, where YouTube, if you get a video and you get 1 million views, you don't have to do anything. You will get paid for that video because of the fact you've attracted 1 million viewers to the YouTube platform. So you will get paid for that. But on podcasts, it doesn't matter. If you've got a podcast that's popular, that has got 1 million listeners to it, then you will find that you'll get companies knocking on your door. Excuse me, I understand you've got 1 million listeners. Would you promote our product on your podcast and we'll pay you? And that's the way you'll make money, by increasing your listenership. That gives you leverage in order to promote products. And you will get other companies who will come to you and offer you their services to promote on your show. And that way you will make money. Let's move on. I'm mindful of the time. Right, what you want to do, you want to edit your podcast. And this is a simple one to use because it's free. Okay, there's steps on doing it. It's called Audacity. And I was going to give you a little tutorial on this, but we haven't got time for that, so I can't. So I was going to actually show you what a recording that I'd done and go through the actual editing, because this, I've purposely done it too loud because there's too many peaks in here. So what would happen on this particular recording you see in front of you, that's too noisy. A listener would be able to hear it, but they'd hear the sort of turn away. Oh, that's awful. That's a bit sounds very bitty. So before you send an audio out, you need to tweak it. And there's settings in Audacity which allow you to lower these peaks and remove them and smooth it out and make it sound nicer to the ear. This is all part of the editing phase. So you do need to get this bit right to ensure that your audio isn't screechy. Now, on a phone, if you're not too close to it, you can avoid a lot of this, strangely enough. As long as you mind your P's and you don't pop, you can actually get some really high quality recording from a phone, which avoids a lot of this stuff, which is really strange. But hey, that's a separate thing. I'm mindful of time, so I'm not going to do a demo on this stage. But if you subscribe to me, I am planning on doing an advanced course which goes through this in more detail on the key elements to improve the sound quality of your recordings, if that's of interest, of course. Right, audio hosting. There's several of them. And if you can see these are some of the bigger ones. Now, they're not household names. They're not. I mean, there's others. It's just a few of the bigger ones. There's some smaller ones as well. There are some, however, that do host for you, but they can cause you a problem, because what they do is they say, oh, you can make money from a podcast. Just put them on our platform. We'll pay you for just putting them on our platform. And you think, ooh, that sounds interesting. But what they do is, part of your contract is they agree to insert an advert literally at certain key points through your podcast. So your podcast will be interrupted and an advert will appear just for a few seconds, and then it will carry on. Now, you can do that if you want. If you're starting out and you haven't got any money to pay them to do it properly, then that is an option. But I wouldn't recommend that. But unless you're really stuck, then by all means have a look. But they're not the best, let's be fair. They are the cheap end of the market. Then, finally, promote. You've got to promote. Now, as I've said, the hosting companies don't promote for you. They really don't. So you've got to do it yourself, unfortunately, in the beginning. And you could do it by any means you want. You can tell other Toastmasters, oh, please listen to my podcast. You could put it on social media. Oh, please listen to my podcast. We're talking about this great subject. Now, you can pay for advertising. It's up to you. I wouldn't initially. I would just put it out to your friends, family, whoever, your circle of influence, and say, oh, support me. Come listen to my podcast. See what you think. I'd value your opinion. That way, you would ask them to recommend it to anyone else if they liked it. And also, you can get feedback. My suggestion would be, in the early days, is to get a pilot one out and put it out to just key individuals that you trust for their opinion, and ask them to say, what do you think of my podcast? Am I talking with the right tone? Am I portraying enough energy? So these are sort of things that you want to get right, and before you create your 10 episodes. You want to do a pilot episode first, run it past some close people that you trust for their opinion and feedback. That way they can steer you on what you may need to tweak for your remaining episodes. Right, I have wobbled on far too long now. I've got a Q&A session here. So if you have any questions, I've tried to keep that as succinct as possible. Has anyone got any questions? Is anyone not fallen asleep yet? Is everyone okay with... Okay, how to find a podcast? Well, you search on Google. How many episodes do you record ahead of time? We have 5 in the bank. We always have 5, because if one of us is ill, we can't record. We can then the show producer has got one to fall back on. So yeah. How do you pick a title? That's up to you. You have to run that past yourself. You could have to take some time in order to do that, because it's something you need to get right. So you do need to spend some time on making sure that's okay. What's this one? District supported. Oh gosh. How to pick a title. What's the best phone, please? Oh, okay. I mean, honestly, any of them. Any smartphone you have, a Samsung or iPhone, they're particularly good if you have one of them. You can create. There's a guy on a podcasting channel who's done his whole. I think he's a guy. Thinking about it. Is he a guy or a girl? It could be actually a female. My apologies. Done her a disservice. Yeah, does the whole thing on an iPhone. Whole thing. And is very, very successful. Gets loads and loads of listeners, all on an iPhone. What presentation software do you use for your... I use OBS. So actually, let me take the slide off here. I'm going to go back so you can actually see me. You don't need this anymore for the time being. Yeah, so I am going to share... Oh, actually, I am going to share something else on here. And I do... Oh, actually, let's go back to my slides. I do want to show some feedback here, please, if you wouldn't mind. Okay, I'd love you to fill in it's an online form. It's just a quick feedback form on what you thought of this content, because obviously I'm still tweaking it, trying to get it better. I really, really would value your feedback on the content that you've heard today. You know, was it the right pace? Did it give you enough time to digest what we were talking about? Did it give you takeaways that you can actually put into practice, because if it didn't, there's no point. So I'm hoping that it was of some value. I'm going to drop the link for that survey in the chat, so it's here. If you wouldn't mind doing that, let's put that to everybody. Let's paste that in. Right, can you see the link? Can I see nods, please, if people have can see the link in the chat? Yes, cool, wonderful. If you would be kind enough to fill that in. You don't have to do it right now, but if you take, honestly, take you a couple of minutes if you wanted to do it. But any further questions? Why do a lot of people call a video a podcast, Sue? Why do people call a video a... Well, it's because maybe it's regular. Podcasts really are a regular thing. When someone does a podcast, they tend to be quite functional in their release. They do release them on a regular schedule, which is what you really need to try and aim for. And actually, what I will put up here, I'll put up my contact details. If anybody wants to reach out to me and find me on Facebook or anywhere else, you've got the link to my my feedback form, so if you would be kind to fill that in. But also if you want to keep in touch with me, I've got my own website on here, so if you want to make a note or take a picture of the screen, you're more than welcome to do that. You can follow me on LinkedIn. If you want to hear the back episodes of the TNT Talk Show, you hear how Tony, I'm Tony, Teo and I get on our shows, then by all means listen to our back episodes. But if you're in the Milton Keynes area, or if you have a radio app for your phone, you can tune in to Seclo Radio on a Sunday night at 11 o'clock to listen to us then and see what you think of our show. We'd love your feedback. We'd love any comments you think about the show. And yeah, go from there. Idra, how do you make sure that the volume is equal across the board? I've heard podcasts with loud intros and bare audible content. You've got to get the dB correct across the whole pit. That's the normalization stage. When Audacity does it actually quite well, where there's a setting in there called normalize, and it normalizes the volume to a minus dB. It doesn't let you go too high beyond that, because if you're too loud at the intro and then you're too low in between, you've not equalized it properly. So those people who are doing that haven't got that right. We have a recording studio in the area. Margaret, would you recommend having a chat to the local guys? Yes, if you can get to them and it's COVID safe, then I don't see a problem with that. But like I said, that's really, if you can get it for free, then you're on a winner. But it's not necessary for a podcast. But if you've got access to that sort of level of equipment, Margaret, then by all means, exploit it. Why not? Who's that? Jenny. Cheapest way to get podcasts visible away from family and friends. Well, don't promote it to your family and friends, Jenny. I don't know what else to say. I mean, you could. I mean, you could just release it because they won't search for it. It's very tough to search for it. Now, granted, we've been going a little while, so we're at the top of Google. So if you search for the TNT Talk Show, we come up. But when you're first starting out, it's hard to get to the top. So, but that gets more from listeners, people engaging with you, and going from there, really. I'm mindful that we're getting close to the top of the hour. How did you get Tayo and social media platforms like Facebook? I had to get him on there because, Facebook's not the best platform in the world, but for engaging audience, it really is good. So we've set up our own page on Facebook. Please come along and like us, because you'll see there what our next shows are going to be. So please go on there, and we'd love you to like our page if you hear what we say. And if you catch our show, you'll see that we're quite chalk and cheese, Tayo and I. So they can be quite eventful and quite loud, not loud audible, but loud. How can I describe it? We're chalk and cheese. There you go. You'll see what you think from the show. Thank you, Philip. I appreciate that. If Oh, where we go? What's the difference between podcast and documentary, Damien? Well, podcasts and documentaries, there's a blur between the lines, because a documentary is more where you're actually out in location. Now, you could do that with a podcast. That actually, Damien, would make a fantastic podcast. If you don't have to be bound by recording equipment and you can take it with you, so you can have a phone, for instance, and you can have a lapel mic with a wind cover, so you don't get any wind out there. You can take that with you. Absolutely, that's a magical way of doing it, because if you're walking through woods, the people can then hear the crunching under the feet. That is a phenomenal podcast. So Damien, please, that if you want to pursue that, then that is a terrific way of creating a podcast. You're making the experience real for people. Jenny, thank you for your feedback. I hope those of you will fill in the form and give me some sort of feedback. I'd really appreciate it. What's that say? Could we showcase podcasting in action at this year's district virtual conference? Oh, I don't know what you mean by that, Daniel. Wouldn't you showcase it? In what
I was
respect?
thinking more of a conference radio station.
A conference radio station. Yeah, you could do. You'd have to have... yeah, you could record the whole thing, absolutely, as a podcast. Yes, that would work. You could have a live event. You'd need an MC or the radio host doing it. Yeah, that would work.
Peel off some interviews with the keynotes.
Emma, good question. What software do you use? Well, do you know what? I actually use Zoom while being at home. It works. Because Tayo and I obviously can't be in the same place. So we use Zoom. And we then tidy up the audio after. But it works brilliantly. Out of, it's not the best. It was of a review recently. Zoom has been improving the sound quality of its product. So when the sound is on, it works really well. It really does. Now, obviously, tempered with that, you need a reasonable microphone at your end. But Zoom does do a good job of recording pretty good quality. But you do still have to tidy up a few bits using tools like Audacity. Thank you, Colette. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah.
Sorry, it's Emer here. I'm using VoiceOver on my phone, so it's a bit difficult to do the chat. I just meant in terms of on your phone, like is on the iPhone, is there a sort of
an
better,
audio
package,
file.
like
If you go to the iPhone store, there's plenty of them on there that just record audio. I don't use an iPhone. I use a Samsung, and the one that came with the Samsung, the default one, I sometimes do use that. Yeah, I do use that one. It's fine. It's good enough quality. When I'm doing little snippets, because sometimes as part of our show, we've got to promote a product or as part of our format. So rather than do it in the show, what we do is we record it separately. So I sometimes, if I can't be bothered to set up my mic, I just do it on my phone. I'll record the promo or whatever it is they want us to promote, and then I sometimes edit it in myself, or I send it to Tayo, and Tayo will just pop it in at a key point within our recording. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's standard one on the phone. There we go.
Tony.
Yep.
Tony, if you have an iPhone, you can use voice memos.
Yes,
to record
that'll work.
Sound.
Yeah, that'll work.
Yeah.
No, well, there you go. Teresa just answered that.
Yeah.
Real. I hope you enjoyed it. I really, really hope that it's been beneficial, and you've managed to get something out of today. And who knows, I might get a few more listeners to our TNT talk show. I hope you would. Listen in one time. You might be surprised at what we talk about. Like I said, if you go to the link at the very bottom of this page that I'm sharing, the one that's the talk show, tinyurl.com, you'll see all our back episodes that are there. And we've got loads of all different topics that we discuss on our show. Some we've had guests on the show. Some which just been tiring out, but certainly have a look, and if there's anything you like, then let us know. We'd really appreciate it. definitely.
Okay.
I'll argue with my iSpeaker until she finds you. Yeah, if you got Alexa, just say, Alexa, please play podcast The TNT Talk Show, and it will play.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Tony.
Yeah.
But we have just gone past the hour.
Yeah, I realise that.
Thank you so much.